People aren't computers. They're social creatures with all manner of ingenious quirks. They have evolved weapons to protect against dangerous knowledge polluting the worldview they depend on. Those weapons have names: skepticism, mistrust, dislike, boredom, incomprehension. And by the way, those weapons are invaluable. If your mind were open to all incoming language, your life would quickly fall apart. So, your very first job as a speaker is to find a way to disarm those weapons and build a trusting human bond with the audience. Happily, there are numerous ways to make that vital early connection. Here are 5 suggestions. Make eye contact right from the start. At TED, our #1 advice to speakers on the day of their talk is to make regular eye contact with members of the audience. There's a reason for this. Humans have evolved a sophisticated ability to read other people by looking at their eyes. We can subconsciously detect the tiniest movement of eye muscles in someone's face and use it to judge not just how they are feeling, but whether we can trust them. And while we're doing that, they're doing the same to us. Scientists have shown that just the act of 2 people staring at each other will trigger mirror neuron activity that literally adopts the emotional state of the other person. We look at each other and our minds sync. Show vulnerability. One of the best ways to disarm an audience is to first reveal your own vulnerability. It's the equivalent of the tough cowboy walking into a saloon and holding his coat wide open to reveal no weapons. Everyone relaxes. Brené Brown gave a wonderful talk on vulnerability at TEDx Houston, and she began it appropriately.
So I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event, and she called and she said, "I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer." And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, "Well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant." And I was like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller, so I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, "You're going to call me a what?" And she said, "I'm going to call you a storyteller." And I was like, "Oh, why not Magic Pixie?" I was like, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage, and I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, "You know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller?" And she went, "There's no such thing." So I'm a researcher.
You love her already. Vulnerability can be powerful at any stage of a talk. One of the most stunning moments witnessed on the TED stage came when neurosurgeon and best-selling author Sherwin Nuland had just completed a tour de force history of electroshock therapy. He was knowledgeable and funny, and he made it all seem interesting, if a little terrifying. But then he stopped. He said he wanted to share something he'd never spoken or written about before. You could have heard a pin drop. Nuland went on to unveil his own secret history of debilitating depression, an illness that got so bad doctors were planning to remove part of his brain. Instead, as a last resort, they tried electroshock therapy, and eventually, after 20 treatments, it had worked. By making himself so deeply vulnerable to the audience, he was able to end his talk with extraordinary power.
Why have I chosen, after never ever talking about this, to talk about it now? Well, those of you who know some of these books know that one is about death and dying, one is about the human body and the human spirit, one is about the way mystical thoughts are constantly in our minds, and they have always to do with my own personal experiences. One might think, reading these books, and I've gotten thousands of letters about them by people who do think this, that based on my life's history as I portrayed in the books, my early life's history, I am someone who has overcome adversity. That I am someone who has drank of the bitter dregs of near disaster in childhood and emerged not just unscathed, but strengthened. I really have it figured out so that I can advise people about death and dying, so that I can talk about mysticism and the human spirit, and I've always felt guilty about that. I've always felt that somehow I was an imposter because my readers don't know what I have just told you. It's known by some people in New Haven, obviously, but it is not generally known. So one of the reasons that I have come here to talk about this today is to, frankly, selfishly unburden myself and let it be known that this is not an untroubled mind that has written all of these books. But more importantly, I think, is the fact that a very significant proportion of people in this audience are under 30. And there are many, of course, who are well over 30. For people under 30, and it looks to me like almost all of you, I would say all of you, are either on the cusp of a magnificent and exciting career or right into a magnificent and exciting career. Anything can happen to you. Things change. Accidents happen. Something from childhood comes back to haunt you. You can be thrown off the track. I hope it happens to none of you, but it will probably happen to a small percentage of you. To those to whom it doesn't happen, there will be adversities. If I, with the bleakness of spirit, with no spirit that I had in the 1970s, and no possibility of recovery as far as that group of very experienced psychiatrists thought, if I can find my way back from this, believe me, anybody can find their way back from any adversity that exists in their lives. And for those who are older, who have lived through, perhaps not something as bad as this, but who have lived through difficult times, perhaps where they lost everything, as I did, and started out all over again, some of these themes will seem very familiar. There is recovery. There is redemption. And there is resurrection. There are resurrections.
This is a talk everyone should see. Sherwin Nuland passed away in 2014, but his vulnerability and consequent inspiration live on. Willing to be vulnerable is one of the most powerful tools a speaker can wield, but as with anything powerful, it should be handled with care. Brené Brown has seen a lot of speakers misinterpret her advice. She told me, formulaic or contrived personal sharing leaves audiences feeling manipulated and often hostile towards you and your message. Vulnerability is not oversharing. The best way I found to get clear on this is to really examine our intentions. Is sharing done in service of the work on stage, or is it a way to work through our own stuff? The former is powerful, the latter damages the confidence people have in us. Authentic vulnerability is powerful, oversharing is not. If in doubt, try your talk on an honest friend. Make them laugh, but not squirm. Concentrating on a talk can be hard work, and humor is a wonderful way to bring the audience with you. If Sophie Scott is right, part of the evolutionary purpose of laughter is to create social bonding. When you laugh with someone, you both feel you're on the same side. It's a fantastic tool for building a connection. Some of the very best speakers spend a significant portion of their talks building this connection. In Sir Ken Robinson's talk on schools' failure to nurture creativity, almost all of the first 11 minutes is a series of hilarious, education-related stories that do little to advance his main idea, but instead create an extraordinary bond with the audience. And when he eventually gets serious and moves into his main point about the loss of creativity in schools, we're hanging on every word. Likewise, in Brian Stevenson's spellbinding talk about injustice, he spent the first quarter of his time on a single story about how his grandmother had persuaded him never to drink. The story ends hilariously, and suddenly we all felt deeply connected to this man. Caution. Successfully spending that much time on humorous stories is a special gift, not recommended for most of us. But if you can find just one short story that makes people smile, it may unlock the rest of your talk. Of course, it doesn't always work. Humor is a skilled art, and not everyone can do it. Ineffective humor is worse than no humor at all. If you plan to do a lot of public speaking, it's really worth trying to find your own brand of humor that works. And if not, don't panic. It's not for everyone. There are plenty of other ways to connect. Would you want to trust your mind to someone who is completely full of himself? Nothing damages the prospects of a talk more than the sense that the speaker is a blowhard. And if that happens early on, look out. I vividly remember a TED Talk from many years ago that began, "Before I became a living brand," and there, right there, you knew it wasn't going to end well. The speaker was on a high after some recent major commercial success, and we were going to hear about every last bit of it. Even if you truly are a genius, it's best to let your audience figure that out for themselves. TED speaker Salman Khan put it beautifully. Be yourself. The worst talks are the ones where someone is trying to be someone they aren't. If you are generally goofy, then be goofy. If you are emotional, then be emotional. The one exception to that is if you are arrogant and self-centered, then you should definitely pretend to be someone else. Ego emerges in lots of ways that may be truly invisible to a speaker who's used to being the center of attention. Name-dropping, stories that seem designed only to show off, boasting about your or your company's achievements, making the talk all about you rather than an idea others can use. I could tell you to go back to basics and to remember that the purpose of your talk is to gift an idea, not to self-promote, but even then you might miss it. It can be hard to see from the inside. Every leader needs someone she can count on for raw, honest feedback, someone who's not afraid to upset or offend if need be. If you're feeling proud of what you've recently accomplished, it's important to try out your talk on that trusted person and then give them the chance to say, "That was great in parts, but honestly, you come over a little full of yourself." Tell a story. We're born to love stories. They are instant generators of interest, empathy, emotion, and intrigue. They can brilliantly establish the context of a talk and make people care about a topic. Powerful stories can appear at any stage of a talk. A great way to open, a great way to illustrate in the middle, and sometimes, though less often, a great way to end. The stories that can generate the best connection are stories about you personally or about people close to you. Tales of failure, awkwardness, misfortune, danger, or disaster told authentically are often the moment when listeners shift from plain vanilla interest to deep engagement. They have started to share some of your emotions. They have started to care about you. They have started to like you. But be careful. Some stories can come over as boastful or emotionally manipulative. When you explain the amazing way you turned a problem into a thrilling success, far from connecting, you may actually turn people off. The guideline here is just to be authentic. Is that the real you telling this story? A good test is to imagine whether you would tell this story to a group of old friends, and if so, how? Friends are good detectors of the inauthentic. And so are audiences. Be real, and you won't go too far wrong. I've sometimes described these suggestions as tools or techniques. It's important they don't come over that way. They need to be part of an authentic desire to connect. You're a human. Your listeners are humans. Think of them as friends, and just reach out.